Welcome back. We did it. We got 100 subscribers. Not that I was trying to get a bunch of subscribers. You noticed I've never once asked anyone to smash a like button or a subscribe button. If you want to do that, feel free. I'm here to learn how to play chess. And in honor of getting 100 subscribers, which is still pretty cool, I'm going to do what I always do. In this case, I'm going to continue working on my endgame weaknesses. This is not a position from one of my games. This is a position from a puzzle on Lichess, and as far as I know, all the puzzles on Lichess come from actual games, and they usually have the link, as far as I can tell, always have the link to the game that they came from. In this case, it was a bullet game between Magnus Carlsen and somebody else whose username I don't recognize. Both are rated over 3,000 in bullet. Regardless, the puzzle starts one move after this, where white makes the best move, which is to check on b7, and then black blunders, and it's no longer dead even. Instead of doing the only two moves that aren't blunders, black's king goes there. And this is where the puzzle starts. And of course, the puzzle doesn't say that's a blunder when it starts. But I can find a link to show from the actual puzzle page. The link is to the actual game. Anyway, white to move and solve this puzzle. And I'm not really thinking of it as a puzzle, but as an actual endgame exercise. Now, the first thing that I notice in this endgame is that black has two passed pawns that are very close to promotion. White has correctly placed a rook behind the passed pawns, and white's pawns here are not doing well. They're blockaded by this pawn, but the king is close enough to capture the pawn. White has one passed pawn, and that's probably why the black king chose to go that way. I mean, there's 20 seconds left in a bullet game, but 1 plus 0, so no increments. Anyway, I assume that's why the black king would have gone that way, to somehow prevent this pawn from advancing. Due to the placement of the black rook, it can't get over there in one move to get behind this passed pawn. It's going to take at least two moves to get there. So what is white's move here? When I first saw this, and of course I'm not seeing the engine because I'm seeing it as a puzzle, my first instinct was to go toward the king, because if you get the two kings in opposition, which cut off the three squares between them, that's checkmate. But that would be the case if those were the only three pieces on the board. If they were the only three pieces on the board, I would try to get my king directly in front of this one, but then it would be their move, so I might move it straight forward. So if the king went over, I would come over, he would have to get into the opposition with my king, and then that would be checkmate. That's the strategy if they're the only three pieces on the board. Or also those would not really be relevant to that strategy. However, with this on the board, that would not be the best move, because they don't have to move the king at that point. So it takes some figuring out, and I've already displayed the engine on the screen, so you know that this is the best move here. In fact, it says king to f6 takes you back to drawn. The reason is because this rook is here, and these pawns are pretty close to promotion. If this rook goes here, we can throw in a check, but now this rook can get behind the passed pawn. That's if we go here. If we go here, which is what I moved, fortunately, because I noticed that it's not a simple king and rook checkmating pattern, nor is it necessarily about getting this passed pawn down, but we also have to consider all of this other stuff. But I decided if the reason that king moved that way was to somehow stop this pawn, I thought the correct move was for me to go here to help shepherd my passed pawn down. And if I do go there, and if black does anything else besides move the king, that's checkmate. Pretty sure. So that's what we do. Yeah, Stockfish wasn't sure about that. You saw it jump up and jump down. Okay, now here, if, say, the rook decides to chop off this pawn and try to get over here, well, that's checkmate. That's why the engine is showing the only move that's not mate in 2 or less. Like, for example, if black does this, well, it's mate in 1. Because, again, the kings are in opposition. So the black king can't move forward, and rook on that back rank would be checkmate. So the best move has to be moving the king. And if the king moves this way, again, that's just checkmate. For example, boom, boom. That's the end of the game. Because it doesn't have to be in opposition if it's stuck against the side of the board. Okay? So the only move that's not made in 2 or less is this. And so that's the correct move of the puzzle. But then if black does that, my instinct was to try to follow it into opposition. But again, that is if none of these pieces are on the board. So if black's king moves this way, I'm not worried about check at this point, because again, that rook can't get over there because this pawn's in the way. The only correct move is to move this pawn forward. The only thing that I could think about here was that, I mean, white only has 3 pieces that can move, right? If you check, the king gets out. If you move your king over, well, they just move their king over. And if you move your king again, well, they just move their king again. And pretty soon you're going to have to bring your rook over here to get it away from the danger of their king. So the correct move is, that's the reason that it's of the 3 pieces you have that can move, this doesn't do anything going sideways, back and forth, left and right. And again, if you check, this comes out. If you move the king, so that remains the only move that doesn't let the king out or get the king in danger of hitting your rook. Also, you can't do anything really crazy because you have these other passed pawns down here. This one can promote pretty quickly. This one can't promote till the rook gets out of the way. So it has to be this pawn move. And again, Stockfish wasn't sure at first, but now this rook has to come. There's really no other choice. For example, if the rook comes here, trying to maybe block the check, let's see what happens there. Well, now you can... Oh, I was going to say you could check, and then if it blocks, you could take it. But here the correct move is to advance the pawn. Okay, I was wrong on that, because then you'd have mate from behind. That works. Okay. So there are only 2 moves that don't lose, and one is, or don't lose instantly, or have a definite mating pattern. But I'm not understanding rook b1. What does rook b1 do? It avoids this pawn. It lets you get around without having to take that pawn. Okay. That's why, okay, I can see it's about the same recommendation as taking the pawn is coming here, because either way you're trying to get past that pawn. This takes a pawn and then goes past. This just moves over so you can go past. Either way, it's 2 moves to get past this pawn horizontally. Okay, so let's say they take that pawn. Now what's the move? Well, the king still can't come this way. But if I move my king here, then we rerun into the same problem as before. It gets closer to my rook, and I'm going to end up having to make a rook move to get it away from that king. If I move my king... Sorry, if I check with the rook, the king just gets out, as we already discussed. So I need the rook to stay on this rank, keeping that king back there. I need this king to help shepherd this pawn down, so I don't, and this one can't move. So that basically narrows down to, it has to be that. Now, the only good move for black that doesn't set up an immediate mating pattern is getting behind that passed pawn. So I can't promote immediately. But now, these pawns are completely unprotected. That's why it says by far, white's best move is just to take one of these. That's why we put the rook behind the passed pawns in the first place, is so that when this rook has to come defend against something else, we can start chopping them off. Again, if I try to advance this pawn, the rook takes it. If I move my king, the rook takes it. If I check, their king gets out. In fact, if I move off this file at all, the king can get out. But taking care of these passed pawns is very, very, very important because of how close they are. So, best move, but the king gets out, or it can. Here the engine is unsure. It's taken its time to think whether that's the best move or getting this one step closer to promotion. But it says A2. It's decided on A2. Now we're past the point of where the puzzle ended now, but I still want to follow this out because it's important, and all of these things have reasons. And here, it says I can go back and check, in which case the king's going to get out, or I need to get behind this pawn. Because if you're not checking, you've got to be there. So let's say I checked instead. So I check. The only legal move, king comes out. Now I absolutely, look at that, only one move that doesn't lose, and that's getting behind this pass pawn. So it can't promote. Stockfish was worried about that for a second. But now the king gets further away from that back rank. But I can't take this pawn while there's rooks on it. I mean, I can, and then I would get a queen. I wonder how bad that is. What happens if I take that pawn? Well, it's their move. It says they would probably go here. Yeah, only good move is to check. Definitely not to take the pawn. Just out of curiosity. What happens now? Don't I get a queen now? Well, it says black has a huge lead at this point. And I know why. I just saw it. Doesn't matter if I get a queen. This is check. And the kings are in opposition. So my king has to go that way, and then they'll win my queen on the next turn. For example, check. Sorry, that's not check. Check. My king can't move this way. It has to get in front of the queen. And even if I go there, doesn't matter. Takes the queen. And guess who's going to get to these pawns first? Black is. I can't get there. I can get there, but yeah. And the kings are in opposition, so this king has to go back somewhere. Well, it can't go there. It has to go to one of those. Well, yeah, sorry, it can go there. I forgot which direction the pawn was moving. So it doesn't really matter because this pawn's going this way. That's why I couldn't promote there. It would be tempting. It would be tempting to take this pawn, thinking that the rook will take and not be guarding this promotion square anymore, and I'll get my queen. But due to the position of the kings, that's not it. White only maintains the advantage here if they check again. Stockfish is a little worried about how much advantage you got. Okay, nope. 4 point. Okay, 54. Wow. Stockfish had a hard time seeing that. Basically, no matter where the black king goes, white still has the advantage. But that's because the king has to move out of this opposition now. I'm learning this right now. I just realized. That's why this is such a great move, is because it doesn't matter which way this king goes. Any of the squares that it can legally move to, then we can take this pawn, sacrificing our rook, and get our queen. Because watch, Let's say it goes here to protect its own pawn. Now I take this. When black takes, and I get my queen. Now when they come back and check. Oh, not only that, we queened with check. Okay, never mind. Let's say we didn't queen with check. Let's say the king had moved this way. Okay, now we can sacrifice our rook. That's what I was trying to say. Because the kings aren't in opposition anymore. It doesn't matter if you queen with check or not. Because now when this comes over to check, we don't have to move in front of our queen anymore because we have a getaway square. So we can come here and they can't skewer the queen. That was the difference between sacrificing that rook for the pawn when the two kings faced each other. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. I started before the puzzle started and I went beyond where the puzzle ended. In case you're curious, according to Lichess, Magnus Carlsen ended up losing this bullet game, but not for the reasons that I had here. There were other blunders. But once again, before I close, we got 100 subscribers. So thank you so much for all your support, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.